Well, good morning. Happy summer. Welcome to Westbridge Church. My name's Jeremiah. I'm one of the pastors here, and it's so great to have you with us. I want to say hello to everybody joining us online. Thanks for participating through that venue. And if you're in a parent viewing room, that's a great option. If you have small kids you prefer to keep with you during the service. Hello to those of you joining us in our cafe as well. And a couple of quick things before we jump into the talk today. One is this. For so long, we've said, for the past couple of years, get the Church Center app, Church Center app. Have you heard of the Church Center app? Get the Church Center app. And you've heard that over and over again. And now we're changing it on you again. So, but for the good, for the better. We, over the last couple of months, have been developing our own Westbridge Church app. So now, when you interact with us on Sunday mornings, what you're going to want to do is download the Westbridge Church app. It's got our logo, it's got our name, and it's so much easier to navigate. And so we realized that as much as we love the Church Center app, it was a little bit cumbersome on the user just to try to navigate some things. Sometimes it would pull you out to a web browser. Sometimes it would pull you out somewhere else. And we just thought, man, sometimes this thing is cumbersome. Sometimes you'd go to log in and you'd have to have them text you a code so you can get into it again, and you're like, this is my thing, I don't get it. And so we just went, man, how do we make this easier? So we've been working on, for the last couple of months, building an app. It's the Westbridge Church app. I want to encourage you to download that. That's going to be your best way to engage with us, and it's all in one spot. And here's what's cool about it. Connection card, notes, watch live online, go check out past messages, watch them right, everything's right inside the app, and you can even watch messages and keep that open inside the app while you're navigating other parts of the app. It's crazy, and so it's really, really great. So I'd encourage you, bust out your phone right now, download the Westbridge Church app, and if the whole room was just filled with, little glowing faces, that'd be fine for me. So, encourage you to download that. It's going to be a much better user experience for you here on Sunday mornings. The other thing is, last year we tried to do a lake baptism, but we went too late in the year. And it ended up being the dog days of summer, and the whole beach was closed because it was covered in bacteria. And so some of you might remember this. We were like, hey, if you're going to get baptized this weekend, we're not going to the lake. I mean, it happened like overnight where all the lake, the whole beach area was shut down. So we had to sort of pivot, and we rented Captain Party Time hot tub rental, and we brought them here and brought them out on the patio, and we were like doing baptisms there. So we've shifted it a little earlier because we know the lake will be cleaner, so that's why we're doing this in July instead of in August. So if you're interested in getting baptized, make sure you sign up for that. You can do that on the Westbridge app. So there you go. All right. The other thing is, this summer we're doing a series, called Summer School. Summer School, that starts today. And Summer School is this. It's just different voices all summer long, learning about different voices in the Scriptures. And so between myself, we've got a couple other staff members that are going to be speaking a few times this summer. We have a couple other guests that we're going to be bringing in. I'll be speaking a few times throughout the summer, and we're just going to hear from different voices all summer long. And so today kicks off Summer School. Summer School is in session. So here we go. In 2006, during the Winter Olympics, 2006, Lindsay Jacobellis had an overwhelming 3-second lead in the snowboard cross final. Now, 3 seconds doesn't feel like a lot maybe when you're like, 3 seconds, that's not a big lead. But when you're racing somebody head to head, 3 seconds is a massive lead. And especially when you're going, 60, 70 miles an hour on a snowboard. And so they're flying down the hill. She comes off the last jump, and all she has to do is land and cross the finish line. And she wins gold. And she's like, oh, this is amazing. And in this moment of celebration, she does this method grab with her board, and wouldn't you know it, wipes out. And slides, and before she can get herself up and get across the finish line, her competitor comes flying past, and she ends up settling for silver. What a dramatic finish, right? It's amazing how often this happens in sports and races of every different kind. Another guy, Taoufik Makhloufi from Algeria, won a gold medal in the men's 1500 in the 2012 Olympics. 2 years later, he's running a race, the men's 800 meters, and he's in the lead. He's got a couple of strides on these two guys next to him who are off on his left, and he kind of like thinks he's won the race. He sticks out his arms, and he sticks out his tongue. And he's thinking, I'm going to cross the finish line. He's celebrating, and he's looking up at the clock to the left. And as he does, he doesn't see a guy from Kenya that flies past him on the right and crosses the finish line 0.4 of a second ahead of him. And so he crosses, and he's still celebrating. He thinks he's won until he looks up and he sees his name in second place. And he's like, what? What's going on? He celebrated too early, right? And he ran an amazing race, but he didn't finish well. And then there's this finish from college football that has simply come to be known as the play.
Harmon will probably try to squib it, and he does. Ball comes loose, and the Bears have to get out of bounds. Rodgers along the sideline, another one. They're still in deep trouble at midfield. They tried to do a couple of... The ball is still loose as they get it to Rodgers. They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. Oh, the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone. He's got it in the end of the Bears. The Bears have won. The Bears have won. Oh, my God. The most amazing, sensational, dramatic, heart-rending.
The announcer's losing his mind. And the trombone player became pretty famous. Like, how much do you want to bet that trombone player never went onto a field early ever again? I don't know what he did, but man, that guy just spiked the ball right on his shoulders. He drops his trombone into the end zone. I mean, it's amazing how often this happens. What an incredible finish. They thought the game was over, right? And it's heartbreaking in sports when you feel like, okay, we've got that championship, we've got that gold medal, we've got that series in the bag, but your inability to finish takes it from you at the last second. I can identify because I've been tracking with the Timberwolves for the last couple of weeks. We know the pain of this, right? And so we've all heard this phrase before, haven't we? It's not about how you start, it's about how you finish. And that's not only true in sports, that's true in life. Today I want to look at the life of Solomon. Solomon and what his life can teach us about finishing well. Finishing well. Nobody in life gets to decide or design how you start out. You didn't get to choose what family you were born into. You didn't get to choose where you'd be born or when you'd be born. And my guess is, if there's one of the lessons that we can learn from Solomon, is that you can come from a pretty messed up family and God can still work through you. And how many of you come from an imperfect family? Yeah, a lot of us would say yes. A lot of us just lied in church. That's cool. But here's the reality. I bet you hardly anybody's family is more messed up than Solomon's. Let me give you a little background for Solomon. His dad is King David, probably one of the most famous kings from ancient Hebrew history. And King David was this incredible warrior. He served as the king in Israel for 40 years, conquered all kinds of territories and enemies, and fought all kinds of famous battles. And we get the term David and Goliath from a famous battle that this guy David had before he was ever king. And so you think about this, David has this unprecedented, just amazing history and this reputation. And then he has multiple wives, and as a result of that, he's got a lot of kids, okay? And he's got all kinds of kids who are half siblings with each other. And so his oldest half brother, a guy named Amnon, had violated their half sister. This is Solomon. Solomon had an older brother, half brother named Amnon. He had violated their sister, and their father David did nothing about it. He didn't do anything about it. And so Amnon was killed by another half brother named Absalom. Okay, so here's David. You've got Amnon, Absalom. He's got a son named Adonijah, and then he's got a son named Solomon. Amnon violates their sister, so Absalom kills Amnon. And then he goes to war with David. And they go to war with each other, and he wants to take the throne away from his father David because David didn't do anything about Amnon. And so they go to war with each other, and then Absalom is killed by David's general, a guy named Joab. And then when Absalom dies, now two of David's sons are dead, and when Absalom dies, David cries. He weeps. He says, "Oh, Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you." And that's what Absalom wanted also, actually. So David was not willing to do that. And so then you have this third son, Adonijah. And he decides, I'm going to become the king, and I'm going to usurp the throne. And so he gets a bunch of warriors. He gets 50 chariots and horses and men to run in front of him and starts to build his army. And by way of explanation, why his son would do this to his dad, the scriptures tells there's this verse as you're reading through the story that says that his father David refused to rebuke him by asking, "Why do you behave as you do?" And David apparently was just passive as a father. And I would say if you're a parent, a really good question to ask your kids every once in a while is, why do you behave as you do? That's probably a question we want to ask from time to time, right? And David didn't do this, and everybody paid a price. And meanwhile, you have Solomon. And Solomon is the child, this is the fourth one of David's sons, who is the son of David and Bathsheba. And Bathsheba is someone that David had an affair with. She was a married woman, and David had an affair with her. And then to cover up the affair, and she became pregnant, and to cover that up, he had her husband killed in battle, and then he took her as his bride. And then as a result, later on in life, they end up having Solomon. And then he promises Bathsheba, I will make Solomon king in my place. But now you have this son Adonijah who wants to take the kingdom from Solomon, and he's going to kill Solomon to become king. So to prevent that from happening, Solomon kills Adonijah. Now, let me summarize. Let me just put it all together. In a nutshell, David's first son is killed by his second son. The second son is then killed by David's general Joab, who David was so mad that his general killed his son that he ordered with his dying breath to have his general executed. And then the third son, Adonijah, is killed by David's son, Solomon. Anybody have a worse family than that? It's pretty bad, right? You think our current political climate is intense. Like, just imagine this, right? And so finally, Solomon, so this is what he comes out of. Solomon becomes the king, and he consolidates his power, and he's young, and he's energetic, right? And he's devoted, and one day he goes to worship God, and God appears to him in a dream. He says, Solomon, whatever you ask, I'll grant it to you. What is your request? Ask whatever you want from me, and I will give it to you. And what an amazing offer. And so Solomon makes his request, and he begins thanking God for his goodness. He's thinking about all that God has done, and he thanks him for his goodness. And here's how it starts out. He says, this is Solomon's response to God. He says, you showed great and faithful love to your servant, my father, David. And now, O Lord, my God, you have made me king instead of my father David. David has died, and he's going, and somehow you've made me the king. And he kind of like is thinking through the weight of the responsibility of governing this nation. This is a huge nation now, and this kingdom, and he's probably feeling the weight of the leadership of that. And so here's his request. He says, here I am in the midst of your own chosen people, a nation so great and numerous that they cannot be counted. Give me an understanding heart so that I can govern your people well and know the difference between right and wrong. For who by himself is able to govern this great people of yours? He goes, God, I look at the responsibility of leading this nation, and I feel the weight of that responsibility. I feel the burden of that responsibility, and I just want to do it well. God, I don't want to mess it up, so just give me understanding. Just help me. And God's pleased with this request, and so this is how he replies to Solomon. He says, because you've asked for wisdom in governing my people with justice and have not asked for a long life or wealth or the death of your enemies, I will give you what you asked for. I will give you a wise and understanding heart, such as no one else has had or ever will have, and I will also give you what you did not ask for, riches and fame. No other king in all the world will be compared to you for the rest of your life. What an incredible promise from God. What an incredible gift. And after this comes a famous story where two prostitutes come to Solomon for judgment. And this is one of the first stories we get about the wisdom of Solomon being put on display. And they come to Solomon and they come before his court, and he's there to make a judgment. And one of them says, hey, we each had a baby. And during the night, her baby died and mine lived. And now she's trying to take my baby as her own. And then the other woman says, well, that's the story, all right, except, scratch that, reverse it. That's my baby. Her baby died in the night. And they can't decide, and they're trying to figure it out. And so Solomon, he's presiding over this, and he says, okay, I'm going to make a judgment. Bring me a sword. And they bring him a sword, and everybody's on the edge of their seats like, what is he going to do? And he goes, I've come to a determination here. Let's cut the baby in half. We'll give half to you, and we'll give half to you, and that will settle it. And the one mom goes, sounds good. Let's do it. And the other mom goes, no. Give the baby to her. But please, just don't harm the baby. And in that moment, it becomes obvious to everyone who the mom is. And so he gives the baby to that mother. And everybody's in awe, like, wow, what a great way to solve this, the wisdom of Solomon. And the reason the text tells us that their occupation is because they're the least likely in the ancient world to get justice. People who were born at the bottom of the ladder. No little girl grew up hoping to enter that profession. They lived at risk. They lived at the margins. And here's a king who cares for them, who cares enough even about prostitutes to give them justice. And we're told the nations are in awe of his wisdom and his fame. So here's some of his resume When we read this in the scriptures, God gave Solomon very great wisdom and understanding and knowledge as vast as the sand on the seashore. In fact, his wisdom exceeded that of all the wise men of the East and the wise men of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone else, including Ethan the Ezrahite. I don't know if that means anything to you. Apparently, Ethan was a pretty smart dude. And the sons of Mahol, Haman, Calcol, and Darda. Now, listen, I just have to interject here. When you're better than He-Man, that's amazing. I grew up with He-Man, okay? Master of the universe, and I'm telling you. His fame spread throughout all the surrounding nations. He composed some 3,000 proverbs and wrote 1,005 songs. He could speak with authority about all kinds of plants. He could also speak about animals, birds, small creatures, and fish. Kings from every nation sent their ambassadors to listen to the wisdom of Solomon. Now imagine this, right? This is unprecedented prosperity. He had knowledge about science and botany and the animal kingdom and nature and just all of these things. We're told that when the Queen of Sheba heard about Solomon, she came to test him, to test his wisdom with hard questions, and he passed with flying colors. Nothing was too difficult for him to explain to her, which means he invented mansplaining. It's amazing. And as you can imagine, his wisdom brought him great honor. It brought him great wealth, great recognition, great power, great glory. King Solomon was greater in riches, greater in wisdom than all the other kings on earth. This is the golden era of the history of the nation of Israel. We're told he had a fleet of ships that would go out and return with gold and silver and ivory and apes and baboons. Ships full of baboons. That's when you know you're doing pretty well for yourself. Right? Solomon had so much gold, he doesn't know what to do with it. All of his goblets are made out of gold, but my favorite part is the baboons. It's like, what are you going to do with a ship full of baboons? I just want you to know, I got them. It's just like a flex, you know? It's just like, I don't know, but it's just this way of saying there's unprecedented prosperity in Israel. And take a look at what he consumed every day with his court. We find this in the scriptures. Keeping in mind, a single head of cattle can feed over 800 people. Solomon's daily provisions were 10 head of stall-fed cattle, 20 head of pasture-fed cattle, and 100 sheep and goats, as well as deer, gazelles, roebucks, and choice fowl. He's clearly not a vegan, right? Like, there's no quinoa salad on the menu here. And when you look at all this, we're also told it takes a lot of money to pay for all of that. We're told that the tax burden on the common people became a very, very harsh burden to bear, which is kind of odd for the one who prayed for wisdom to govern well, to be taxing people to such an extent that it becomes a heavy burden to them so that he can live a lavish lifestyle. And then at the same time, he also did a lot of really good things for the nation of Israel. Solomon was able to build the temple of the Lord that his father David had so badly wanted to build. And God had told David, you're not going to build it, but your son is going to build it. And in the text, we're told in incredible detail about how lavish the building materials were. How this part was covered in gold, and this part was made from solid gold, and this part was covered in silver, and this part was, built out of these timbers that were shipped in from this part of Lebanon. And it's just like all of the details about how this incredible temple was built. And the point of those details is that when people read it, they'd go, wow, look at that. Look at the splendor. Look at the majesty. Look at the glory of God's temple. And so Solomon's prayer to dedicate this incredible building is this spiritual masterpiece of wisdom. And then, when you're reading the story, when you're reading the text, there's just this one little verse that kind of gets dropped in, and we're told that the temple of the Lord was so incredible that Solomon had spent 7 years to build the temple. And then we're told this. It took Solomon 13 years, however, to complete the construction of his palace. And there's no editorial footnote. There's no and by the way, there's no, the writer doesn't comment on it and say, here's what I want you to take from that. It just doesn't tell us how we're supposed to react or evaluate it. Just that, hey, just in passing, Solomon spent twice as much time and energy on something for his own glory as he did on something for God's glory. And the temple was built to show Israel's devotion to God. Other nations had many, many temples because they had many different gods. And every god had its own temple, and so if you served a bunch of different gods, then you needed a bunch of different temples. But the nation of Israel just served one God. So they just needed one temple, and it was going to be a temple that blew away all the other temples. So Solomon built this incredible temple, and Solomon built it, and here's what we're told. We are told that Solomon loved the Lord and followed all the decrees of his father David, except that Solomon too offered sacrifices and burned incense at the local places of worship. He followed God. He did everything God asked, except. This is a tiny little word. Except. Solomon loved the Lord. He followed his decrees. He obeyed. He walked with God. He did what was right in God's eyes. Except. This word in this situation has to do with idolatry. Making space in high places, burning incense at local places of worship meant worshiping other gods and worshiping other idols. And it kind of makes me wonder. Maybe you've never thought about this. When I read this story, this is what it makes me think about. If somebody was writing the memoirs of my life, no one ever will, by the way. But hypothetically, if someone were to write, here is what Jeremiah did. He loved the Lord God. He followed the Lord God with all of his heart. He did what was right in the eyes of God, except, and it makes me wonder, if someone was describing my life, what would my exception be? What's my exception clause? What's your exception clause? They followed God with all their heart. They did what was right in the eyes of God, except, there was this one thing. He loved God and followed God's instructions, except with his money. Never could learn how to be generous. He followed God's instructions, did everything that God asked him to do, except with his lack of caring for others. He followed God's commands, except when it came to forgiveness. He just couldn't figure out how to forgive that person that hurt him. He followed God's commands with all of his heart, except when it came to his sexual ethic. He just couldn't figure out how to master his lust. He followed God's commands with all of his heart, except in the way that he treated people, except for his use of deceit in certain areas, except for the way he would judge people, except for the way he didn't take his spiritual growth seriously, except for the way that he never allowed his life to truly be marked by love. They're just parts, and this is what's so dangerous, except. It's a dangerous word because Solomon's life wasn't marked by a big no to God. It was just a tiny little exception clause. I love you, God. I'll follow you. I'll worship you. I want your wisdom, except. It's a very dangerous little word. And other than that, Solomon did amazing things with his wisdom. He built the temple. He wowed the world. He had baboons. He ate like a king. He's the smartest guy in the room. And then we come to the end of this final chapter of 1 Kings that describes Solomon's life. And the writer gives us all of Solomon's accomplishments, his resume, all the things he did. It's absolutely impressive. And then the writer adds this. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. And as a result, here's what happens. In Solomon's old age, they turned his heart to worship other gods instead of being completely faithful to the Lord his God as his father David had been. They turned his heart away instead of being faithful like his father had been. So this little except, this word except that started in the beginning has turned into a big fat however. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women. And this except in the beginning just never really went away. It just grew and grew and grew. And wisdom, this wisdom that he started with leads to success, leads to prosperity, which eventually leads to ego, which eventually leads to complacency, which takes him away from the wisdom that got it all started in the first place. And Solomon is incredibly wise. He got everything he ever wanted, but he ended up doing the very thing that would lead him away from the God who gave him wisdom to begin with. Solomon understood God's instructions. However, except Solomon loved foreign women. How many? Very many. We are told Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Wisest man who ever lived. Got married 1,000 times. I'm just saying. And here's what we're told. Solomon worshiped Ashtoreth. We'll get back to that in a second. The goddess of the Sidonians. And Molech, we'll talk about that. The detestable god of the Ammonites. And in this way, Solomon did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to follow the Lord completely. He didn't refuse to follow the Lord. He just refused to follow him completely. He just refused to follow him with everything. He just held on to that exception clause. And that exception clause led him down a path where he worshiped Ashtoreth. Now, this is a big deal. Ashtoreth is the mistress of the god Baal. And people in the ancient Middle East would practice what was called sympathetic magic. They would do things here on earth to represent how they would want the gods to behave. And so with Ashtoreth, they would often be involved in sacred temple prostitution with young men or young women who they would offer to get the gods to make the earth fertile. And somehow, Solomon's involved in this. Molech is described as detestable because people would offer child sacrifices to the god Molech. And parents would have their children burned at the altar of Molech. And now here is Solomon. And we're just told in these couple of verses that his heart was turned away and he started to worship Ashtoreth and Molech. How did it get this far? How did we get from, God, I'm in the, I want to build this temple to you, the one and only God, and just, I feel the weight of responsibility to lead your people well, so just give me an understanding heart. And God says, I'm going to give you wisdom, and because you didn't even ask for anything, I'm going to give you all of that on top of it. And somehow, we went from that to now, his heart has been turned away, and he worships Ashtoreth and Molech, these other gods. How did we get here? Because that's where an exception clause will lead. That's often where it will lead for us. How in the world did this happen? And it's a pretty simple answer, and it hits you and me as well. See, there's another force in life besides wisdom. It's a big one. Wisdom's wonderful, but there's another force at work in our lives that will eat wisdom for breakfast every day if we let it. It's called desire. Desire. You can follow the way of wisdom. You can allow it to shape your life. The alternative is to just order your life around desire, the things that I want. If I see something that I want and I take it, and if anybody had the ability to do that, it was King Solomon. Now, desire isn't bad in and of itself. God gives us desires. In fact, it's what causes us to want to, eat each day and, breathe and move and be around other people. But desire is a dangerous thing because it's like an appetite that's never fully satisfied. We all know this is true, right? It's like Thanksgiving Day. It's just like you push away from the table and you're like, I couldn't eat another bite as long as I live. 3 hours later, you're roaming through the fridge looking for the turkey leftovers to make a sandwich, It's like, it's an appetite that's never satisfied. And that's what desire is. Desire tricks us. If it's not tamed, it can take over a life. It can cause us to narrow our focus. And the problem with desire is that it's not always connected to what is good. The Apostle Paul, later on, is a guy who would start churches in the first century, and he'd travel all around the Roman Empire, start churches, turn them over to somebody, go start another church, and then he'd write letters back to the people living in those churches, living in those cities where the churches were started. And one of them is in Ephesus, and he writes to the people in Ephesus this phrase. He talks about deceitful desires, that sometimes our desires are deceptive because in the moment, our desire makes us think this, and maybe we never put it in these specific terms, but this is what it's telling us. If I can just satisfy this desire, I will be happy forever. Like, this is it. If I can just gratify this in this moment now, I will never need it ever again. And that's a lie. It's a deceptive desire. And of course, we aren't satisfied. And we aren't happy forever. So here's a couple of things that we can learn from Solomon. Number one, don't ever sacrifice what you want most for what you want now. Like, all of us have something we want most out of life. All of us have a preferred future. But sometimes what happens with desire is it causes us to get tunnel vision, and we focus on the now, and we lose sight of the big picture. Desire causes me to look like this. Wisdom causes me to look like this. And so wisdom would say, look, you have this big picture of where you want your life to go, of a preferred future, what you want your marriage to look like, what you want your life to look like, what you want your relationship with your kids to look like, what you want your relationship with God to look like. You have a picture of those things. Desire will narrow your focus and cause you to go, but I need this now. And oftentimes what you put at risk by satisfying what you want now is what you want most. And so you never want to sacrifice what you want most for what you want right now. That's just wisdom. In fact, when you look at the things that you want most out of life, you would say, man, if the thing I want right now has the potential to rob me of that preferred future, then it's probably not the wise thing to do. Then that's probably not wisdom. And desire narrows my thinking. It wants me to focus just on this desire. In fact, that kind of thinking is hijacking our culture today. Today, this is the message that most people receive. The ultimate goal today is to find happiness by fulfilling yourself. Live your truth, man. Just live your truth. Just find your inner child. And anything that opposes how you feel that you should be living, then you cut that out. You cancel that person. You cut them out of your life if they disagree with your interpretation of how you feel life is meant to be lived. And in reality, delayed gratification is one of the wisest things that we can teach people. Not every desire that I fulfill in the moment is actually good for me, right? If you're a parent, you know this. Nobody has to teach you this. You've seen it in your kids. You go, possible from time to time I say no to my kids. Why? Because not every desire they have in the moment is healthy for them. I'm not going to indulge every desire that a kid has every moment of every day. Sometimes along the way, you got to go, no. Why? Because I love you. That's not good for you. And what we do is we confuse the two. In fact, there's another force at work. It's called love. Now, love is this. It ought to be directed towards what is good and to will the good for someone else. To will the good for another. And it gets confused in our culture with desire. What we've done is we've put the two together and we've said love and desire are the same thing, but love and desire are not the same thing. Think about it like this. Maybe one of the most famous commercial jingles of all time. Some of you might know it. It goes like this. I wish I were an Oscar Mayer wiener. That is what I truly want to be. For if I were an Oscar Mayer wiener, then, sing it with me, everyone would be in love with me. Yeah, not true. Can I tell you something? If you were a hot dog, even if you were a very good hot dog, all beef hot dog, everyone would not be in love with you. They would devour you. If someone loves you, they don't put you on a grill and burn you to a nice char and slather you in ketchup and mustard and diced onions, the only way to eat a hot dog, and devour you. That's not love. You know what that is? Desire. Those are very different things. Desire asks, what do I want? Love says, okay, I'm going to defer what I want in the moment for something better, for the other that wills good for another. But here's where we learn from Solomon. Solomon sacrificed what he wanted most for what he wanted now. And desire cost him. And in chasing what I want, Solomon said this, okay, God, I'll follow you. Except when something that I desire comes into contrast with your ways, in which case, I think I'll just keep going after what I desire. I'm not saying no to you. I'm going to follow you, except when your ways are in contrast with mine. And then I'll hold on to those things. And then my focus gets so narrowed by desire that, like Solomon, I refuse to follow God completely. I follow God except. Now, here's what's amazing about just because we live in the 21st century in the United States of America, we don't even realize this. We take this for granted. Even people who aren't followers of Jesus love the ways of Jesus. Here's what I mean by that. In our culture, what we take for granted is the idea that all people are created equal. That everybody should have equal rights, that everybody should be treated equally, that everybody should have the same access to all the same things, that people have intrinsic worth and value just because they're human beings, created in the image of God. That's baked into our founding documents as a country. And so consequently, for you and I, growing up in the United States of America, living in the 21st century, we just take for granted that that's just how the world works. We think that's human nature. Like, that's just the good that comes from being human. What we fail to recognize is that that is a distinctly Jesus idea. Do you know the world didn't work like that before Jesus came? In fact, you go back to just before Jesus, the first century Roman Empire. You know how the world worked? Whoever had the most wealth and the most power and the most might leveraged their wealth and power and might to get more leverage, to get more wealth and power and might. That's how it worked. And it didn't matter who you had to kill, who you had to step over, who you had to step on, who you had to sell into slavery. It didn't matter. It was all about self-serving. How do I climb as high as I can, as fast as I can? And the entire world worked that way. And into that world, this revolutionary idea from Jesus comes, and he starts to ascribe worth and value to people who lived on the margins and lived on the fringes, people who were outcast from society. He goes, no, they have worth. They have value. He valued women. He elevated the dignity of women. Women had no standing in the first century. Now you fast forward to today, and we go, I love, everybody should just know this, right? That people have rights and the dignity of all people and the worth of all people. No. That's a distinctly Jesus idea. And it comes from this very specific thing that Jesus invites us into, because the message of Jesus, he came over and over in his message. When he came over and over again, he would talk about the same thing. The kingdom of God has come near. You're invited to be citizens of a brand new kingdom. And in God's kingdom, this is how it works. Women have value. Children have value. Lepers have value. People who are on the margins of society and the fringes have value. And in my kingdom, when you step into this kingdom, this is what it looks like. And we look at that in our context and we go, I love that part of Jesus. But here's what we miss. You cannot have the kingdom without the king. What we like to do is we like to treat Jesus like a cosmic life coach. Hey, Jesus, give me some wisdom. Hey, you know what? I messed up a little bit here, so yeah, a little forgiveness this way, that'd be great. And what? Generosity? No. We're not going there. Whoa, serve others. Well, forgive? No. I like the forgiveness coming towards me. I just don't like it so much when I have to forgive others. So let's keep it flowing this direction, not so much that direction. Jesus, the message that he came and brought was, hey, there's really good news. The kingdom of heaven, how heaven operates, how God operates, the kingdom of heaven has come to earth, and you're invited to be a part of it. But that means when you participate in God's kingdom, you're acknowledging his kingship. He didn't come to be a life coach. He didn't come to be a counselor. He didn't come to be our consultant. He said, no. If you'll submit your life to my way, you can enter into this kingdom. We treat it like it's a buffet line at the cafeteria. Like it's old country buffet, and it's kind of like, ooh, I like that. Give me some of this. I like the forgiveness. I like the eternal life part. I love the forgiveness part. Again, only come in this direction, not that direction. Green beans, not my favorite. Skip that. But it's wholesale. You don't get to pick and choose. It's not a la carte. Jesus says, look, I'm the king who's come, and I'm establishing a brand new kingdom, and I'm inviting you to be citizens in this kingdom. And you can participate in it. And, I can design my life around desire. I can do what I want. I can satisfy my desires, or I can design my life around wisdom. Wisdom asks the question, what's best long term? God would suggest, when you follow me in my way, I want what's best for you. When I look at the big picture, I can actually see that not having this particular desire gratified in this particular moment won't kill me, because I can see the big picture. And ironically, wisdom is what Solomon was asking for. He started out asking for wisdom. He wanted an understanding heart so he would know right from wrong and not be driven by impulse and desire. And then when you see this phrase, Solomon loved many foreign women, the reality is Solomon desired many foreign women. That's the right word to use. He did not will for their good, or he wouldn't have stuck them in a harem like some group of cattle. Since he was king, he could satisfy all of his desires. But desire narrows our focus. And here's what Solomon never stopped to ask. He never stopped to ask these questions. If I fulfill the desires that I want to in this moment, what will it do to my heart? What will this do to my devotion to God? What will this do to my nation? What will this do to my children? What will this do to the women themselves? And what we discover from Solomon is that he tried in every way possible. He eventually writes this, Ecclesiastes is this sort of like end of his life journal where he talks about, man, I denied myself no pleasure, he says. I chased everything, wine, women, science, anything that I could fill my mind, fill my body. I tried everything to try to figure out how to fulfill all of my desires here on earth, and none of it satisfied. In fact, he would end up saying it's like chasing the wind. He just didn't finish very well. He ended up at the end of his life writing, it's all meaningless. It's all like chasing the wind. And he reflects on his life and all that he's accomplished and all that he's experienced. And perhaps, maybe with a tinge of regret, he writes this. Don't let the excitement of youth cause you to forget your Creator. Honor him in your youth before you grow old and say, life is not pleasant anymore. And then he goes on to talk throughout this chapter about how life comes and goes, and the desires that you thought were so important in your youth, in reality, are very fleeting. And he gets to the very end of this whole thing, and here's what he writes. He says, this is my final conclusion. Fear God and obey his commands. He goes, this is what it all comes down to. I wish I would have done this. This is my final conclusion. I denied myself no pleasure. I chased all of it. I experienced everything that this life had to offer, and it was all meaningless, and it was all chasing the wind. And I finally, at the end of my life, I've come to this conclusion. You fear God, and you obey him completely. I wish I'd done that. Fear God. Not like, oh, I'm cowering, God, but no, understand who God is. God's God and I'm not. Understand his appropriate position in the universe. And Israel would have to keep looking for someone else to lead them until one day another guy came along who claimed to be a king, but he behaved like a servant. In fact, in Matthew chapter 12, in Jesus' own words, he would say this about himself: someone greater than Solomon is here. Jesus would actually use Solomon as a comparison. And of course, anybody who heard that would have to laugh. Really? Really, Jesus? You? Did you not know about all the stuff Solomon built? Maybe you hadn't heard. You're an obscure carpenter turned penniless, homeless rabbi who wanders around. You don't have a place to sleep. Solomon took 13 years to build his own house. How many baboons do you have, Jesus? Let's just start with that. I don't see very many baboons. I don't think you're doing too well. Here's wisdom. Jesus would say this: if you're worried about fulfilling the desires, your mind is consumed with fulfilling your desires, just look at the lilies of the field. They're not worried. And yet, not even Solomon in all of his splendor is dressed as beautifully as they are. Jesus would use Solomon as comparisons. He said, you want to finish well? Fear God and obey his commands completely. And when you do, what you will discover is not a God who wants you to cower under his lordship. What you'll discover is a loving heavenly Father who sent his Son into this world to introduce us to his kingdom. A kingdom that is marked by servanthood. A kingdom that is marked by self-sacrificial love. A kingdom whose king would rather lay down his life for his subjects than demand that they lay down their lives for him. And Jesus finished well, loving and suffering to the very end on the cross. He would say, not my will, but yours be done. And finally, Jesus would say this: it is finished. And it was, and it is. And you can finish well when you put your trust in Jesus, submit your life to following him completely. Completely. It doesn't matter how you started. It doesn't matter what you came in here with today. It doesn't matter what you're watching with today. None of that matters. It doesn't matter what is behind you. What matters is, what do I do with the rest of the time in front of me? Not how did I start, but how will I finish? What will your life be centered on? And what's your exception clause? My prayer for myself, for each of us, is that God would shine a light on that exception clause. God, I really want to follow you, except. God, I really want to do what's right in your eyes, except. God, I love the kingdom, not sure I'm crazy about the king. God, shine a light on my exception clause. Give me the wisdom to see what that is, and then give me the courage to surrender that to you. That's my prayer for us. And would you consider submitting your whole life completely to following Jesus? Because when you do, you will finish well. And Jesus came into this world, a humble servant, describing what it looks like to follow God completely, to love God as God has loved us. And the ultimate expression of love, he allowed himself to be put to death. His body's laid in a tomb, and according to multiple eyewitness accounts, Jesus rose from the dead. Hundreds and hundreds of people saw him alive. That means death is not the end. There is more to this life than this life, and you and I have been invited. We don't behave our way into it. We don't act our way into it. It's just the God who created you and loves you has invited you into this kingdom, if you'll put your trust in him. If you've never said yes to that, I want to invite you to say yes to that invitation by just agreeing with this prayer as we close. God, please forgive my sins. Forgive me for the times I've walked away from you, and I'm so grateful you never walk away from me. And so make me your son, make me your daughter, and help me to put my trust in you and to follow you as best as I know how from this moment on. No matter where I've been in the past, help me to give you control of the steering wheel of my life, to remove the exception clause, and to trust you and your way of living. And God, for every one of us, this is our prayer. Shine a light on that exception clause in our lives. Help us to see where we're holding back from following you completely, from trusting you completely. And then, God, give us the wisdom to see what that is, and then give us the courage to surrender it. We thank you. We pray this in your name. Amen.